Hello, and thank you all for joining us on the Zoom chat. We have begun the live stream. So in the meantime, while we get ready for our speakers, if everybody could turn off their cameras and microphones except for our speakers, we should be good to go in just a couple minutes. Hello, and thank you all for All right, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today on our Café con Leche panel discussion. My name is Chris LaFuria. I'm from Edinburgh University, and we have just set up our live stream, and we have our panelists joining us here today. I'm going to give just a quick introduction of our speakers, and then I will turn it over to Dr. Stephanie Diaz-Morel, who is our presenter and our host today. This is part of our Latinx Heritage Month celebration, a month that goes from September 15th to October 15th. We're proud once again to host all these important and exciting events and opportunities. This particular panel is brought to you by our Center for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and our Latinx Heritage Month committee. We are also joined from faculty members from Edinburgh, Cal, and Clarion, who are faculty members and staff members and administration who are here to share their story. Just a brief introductions. Dr. Stephanie Diaz-Morel, as I introduced before, she will be our host today. We also have Dr. Sheila Lorenzo de la Pena from Edinburgh's Art Therapy Program, Dr. Andrea Vargas from California in the Humanities, T. David Garcia, who is the VP for Enrollment Management at California, Dr. Sandra Trejos from Clarion, she's in the Social Services Program, and Dr. Jason Hiavalin from Clarion, who is Finance, Law, Accounting, and Real Estate. So thank you so much for joining us. If you do have questions and you're on either the YouTube stream or the Zoom panel, you can shoot them to me directly, or you can send them in the public chat. We want to make sure we get to everybody's points today and everybody's topics too. If you are on YouTube, this video will always be there. So after the show today, it will remain permanently at youtube.com/EdinburghU. So once we're finished, you can head over there and you can rewatch it, or you can share with some of your friends too. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Stephanie Diaz-Morel.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here today. I'm going to share my screen briefly just for a little bit of introduction and some context. So this collaborative panel between Edinburgh University, Clarion University, and California University features various faculty, staff, and administration with varying intersectionalities of Latinx heritage. And as mentioned before, since 1988, from September 15th through October 15th, we observe and acknowledge Latinx Heritage Month, also known as Hispanic Heritage Month. And it is an opportunity to recognize and celebrate the culture, the contributions, and the heritage of American people whose ancestors came from Mexico, the Caribbean, Spain, Central America, and South America. We recognize the adopted term of Latinx Heritage Month, as the term Latinx centers on the people of Latin American origin or descent and is an inclusive term which is a general neutral alternative to the terms Latino or Latina, which we will also be discussing in today's panel. And firstly, I'd also like to acknowledge the historical activism of those who advocated, struggled, and fought for us as people of color to be allowed in an integrated academic space, as historically we were not. And it's thanks to their efforts that we're all gathered here today to discuss Latinx cultura. All right, so you may be wondering why this discussion today is called a café con leche. Well, here's a picture of a café con leche. It's very similar to a latte. And in our culture, having a café con leche is a tradition that includes more than just enjoying a cup of coffee. If you're saying to someone, let's have a café con leche, you're inviting them into your home, into your life, and you're creating a deeper connection through authentic conversation. And café con leche can really be a way of life in some Latinx households, right? It's used to fuel our conversations and our days. And it's very common to sit around a table at a family gathering and to drink and enjoy café in conversation for hours. So often over a café con leche, families and friends who become family discuss their daily lives, they share what they are struggling with, and they even practice being brave by being vulnerable with one another as they share in the joys and the struggles that life can bring. Thus, today, I would like to invite you to join us in a virtual Café con Leche moment. And as we share this collective space, I ask that we make it a brave space. And according to research, to create a brave space means that diversity, social justice, and other issues are discussed with full and equitable participation of people from all social identity groups in a society that is mutually shaped to meet their needs, meaning that all are welcome in this space and your perspectives are valued. So lastly, the changing of the leaves is upon us, right? This might be a scene that many of us will see soon, as the leaves are slowly changing this year. So I'd just like to acknowledge you all for taking the time to attend today, for engaging in this discussion, and for being willing to learn during a time in our lives in which our routines have shifted in an ever-changing world. And so much occurs in our lives and the lives of others that we share this journey with every day, that this impact that it has on each of you and your loved ones can vary greatly, but we all are collectively navigating through many different challenges. So I invite you to just take a moment to acknowledge your efforts in being here today, in seeking to learn and being part of this discussion, and in striving for more. And if you feel that it's helpful to you, I invite you to just take a deep breath in, exhale, and ground yourself to this day, to this moment, and to being present. So with that being shared, I would like to begin our wonderful discussion today with a couple of different points. So I will be taking on the role of moderator as well as participating in the discussion. And the first discussion topic that I would like to propose to our esteemed panel is if they can share anything about your heritage and your connection to the Latino, Latina, Latinx, Latin heritage and culture. So sharing anything about family or a friend custom that you enjoy, any of your favorite dishes, or anything about familia and cultura that you'd like to share with us.
do we just start talking, or you kind of sign us a turn?
So I can start. I would like to share that I am a first-generation American. I'm the daughter of immigrants who came to this country from South America, from Argentina, when they were seeking refuge during a time of civil strife in the country. The time was called La Época de los Milicos. And I'm the youngest of three siblings. I have two older sisters. So being here, born in the US, I learned a lot about acculturation, which is assimilating right to the dominant culture of the US. All of my family actually have names that end in the word Ana. So my mother is Adriana, my older sister is Tatiana, my middle sister is Ivana, and my mother asked my sisters to name me, and they chose the name Stephanie because it was a very popular American name at the time. If not, my name would have been Mariana. It was the name my mother was going to choose for me. And I actually grew up in South Florida, in Miami, which is a big melting pot of cultures. And I was surrounded by a lot of Latinos. And one of my favorite foods are empanadas, because depending upon what country you're from, empanadas are made different. And even in different regions, right? In Argentina, for example, an empanada might be different in the northern part than the southern part or in the central part. And it's all part of the rich cultural heritage that comes from the country. And then I moved here to Edinburgh, and there are still some opportunities to engage with other faculty who are Latino and with others who also share in these customs. And it's been very different to move from Miami to Erie, but I have enjoyed my time here and connecting with others who have also various cultural backgrounds with Latino and Latina and Latinx heritage. So that's a bit about myself.
I can go next. I'm Dave Garcia, currently the vice president here at Cal U. And my kind of background comes from Mexico. My great grandparents from Monterrey, Mexico, and my grandparents who migrated to the Valley of Texas, El Valle de Texas, right there in Brownsville, Texas. And so, my roots are from Mexico. My parents and relatives who were born and raised in Brownsville, Texas, were migrant workers. So they would migrate all the way from Texas to the Northwest Ohio to work in the fields. And so that was a cycle in which they were in. So every year they would migrate from Texas to Ohio to work in the fields. And then once that work is done, they go back to Texas. So eventually my parents found full-time employment in Ohio. So ironically, my father found employment in the Heinz ketchup factory that used to be in Bowling Green, Ohio. So it's ironic in the sense that he was there in the fields picking tomatoes and then found employment there in the factory where they processed the tomatoes that he was picking. So 8 of us kids were born and raised in Ohio. But I will say that I remember one summer my mom had gathered my older brothers and sisters to announce that for that summer, I think I was around 12 years old, that we were going to help our relatives who continued to work in the fields for that summer. So not only were we going to help them pick pickles and tomatoes and all the other vegetables, that we were going to live there in the ranches and the migrant camps, if you will, for that summer. I was not very pleased about that. But I will say that I certainly appreciate my mom doing that for us, because it really did make us appreciate our culture and the hard work that really comes with that experience. But I will say that going away from Northwest Ohio as I progressed in Illinois and then back in Ohio where there weren't large portion or population of Mexican Americans. I do miss quite a bit the quinceañeras that were happening there in Northwest Ohio. It seemed like every week there was something going on there, bodas, weddings, just to kind of hear the Tejano music and the food and the language. And boy, do I certainly miss that tremendously being away from Northwest Ohio. So that's kind of my story, just coming from, you know, a Mexican background, migrant experience, and then you know, the all the cultural things that come with that. So good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning. Okay, I'll take next turn.
You're muted.
Jason, you're muted. Were you able to unmute you from the side?
Okay, I'm sorry. I double clicked on it. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
All right, perfect. I'll start again. My name is Jason Hevelin. I'll start with my name because it's the one that everybody has a question about. But I am from Rio Piedras, Puerto Rico. My father's name is Rafael Avilés and my mother's Gladys Cardona. They're both from Puerto Rico as well. However, my father was adopted by Americans that were living in Puerto Rico at the time, and they gave him the last name Hevelin. So I have a little bit of a name story too, because I have another version when my mom didn't want to mix English last names with Spanish first names. So therefore we ended up with English first names. But the alternative would have been Ronaldo Alfredo Avilés Cardona. That would have been the name I would have been. I would have been Ronnie. So that's kind of a bit of the background. I joined the Army out of high school, and that's when I came over after Army to college, and the story goes on from there. Food-wise, well, Puerto Rico has a lot of variety of foods. Just a warning, because you're always going to hear mofongo. Now, I like mofongo, and it can be delicious, but it's an acquired taste. So a lot of people go to Puerto Rico, eat mofongo, like, oh, well, that's the best they have. So no, it's just that it's popular with us, but there's a lot of the foods. Please try other stuff. Go ahead. I thought I heard somebody.
It's his mother.
I think I hear somebody. Oh, well, I'll continue. Somebody will jump in. So that's the story, my background, and how I ended up with Jason Hevelin.
So I'm going to go ahead. I'm Sandra Trejos, originally from Costa Rica. As I tell my students the first day of class or the first week of classes, I learned English a little too late not to have an accent. I asked them, you know, like, what do we speak in Costa Rica? Spanish. I was born and raised in Costa Rica. So my parents sent me to a French elementary school. So my second language was French. So I have all the bias to not have a perfect American accent. My daughters are a little bit like you, Stephanie. They are first generation. They were born here, 3 out of 4. The first and the second. And the third was born in Costa Rica because we returned from graduate school. So she was born in Costa Rica. And then we came back to the States to now, you know, supposedly for a year just to save some money because we had gone through 2 masters and 2 PhDs in a family of 2 students. So we needed to make sure we could make ends meet. It's the story of, my story is the story of a Costa Rican who really liked economics and wanted to come to the United States to do graduate school because we didn't have PhD programs or masters in economics kind of programs that were, you know, solid yet in Costa Rica. I don't think we have a PhD in economics yet the way we have it here. So I had no money to come to the States. So my way of being able to do that was apply for a scholarship. I applied to the U.S. Agency for International Development scholarship, my husband as well. And we finally, after a process, we both got the scholarship and we came to do the master's fully funded when the first daughter was born. And then we continued with the PhD because we were offered, you know, like opportunities to do like graduate assistantship, teaching associateship for me, and so on. We returned, lived a little bit in Costa Rica, thinking we were going to stay in Costa Rica, because the reason we came to the States was to further our education. Also, the USAID agency requires you to go back to your country, because that's the idea of the international development aspect. Is like you go get trained, you go back to your country and help with international development, which ends up being my field of expertise in economics. And we comply with that. We just asked permission to leave after the PhD because we both really wanted this PhD in economics. I personally had this passion to learn economics, as I tell my students, because of my desire to understand how we can improve people's lives. I tell the students it's not about the graphs and the mathematics, they are tools. Am I in love with a graph? Not necessarily, but they are tools that help us understand society so that we can impact society better. So that's it. Café con leche, of course. When I started drinking café con leche when I was a teenager. Oh, and by the way, I didn't say, so two daughters were born in Oklahoma. We were at Oklahoma State, one in Costa Rica, one back in the state of Indiana. When we came supposedly for a year, but then opportunities happened, and that was in 2000, and this is 2021. I've been at Clarion, this is the start of my 18th year. And yes, pura vida is the expression we have in Costa Rica, pure life, because that's how, I guess, Costa Ricans live their lives. And I hear it from people who are not necessarily Costa Ricans, who've gone to Costa Rica and they fall in love with Costa Rica. And being out of Costa Rica, just trying to make a difference in the United States from my little corner, I've understood that is a great country because people remind me. I think Costa Ricans, we take our country for granted. Arroz con pollo, rice with chicken, is something that is very typical. Casados, which are a typical dish. I've taken students 3 times to Costa Rica and they've learned these things, and I could go on for 3 hours. So I'm going to stop right here. Good to meet you. How are you?
Okay, I'm going to go next. My name is Andrea Vargas. I teach Spanish and forensic linguistics at California University. And I was born and raised in Chile. I just came to the United States in my 20s because I fell in love and somebody tracked me down to Chile and brought me here. Okay. So it's a very interesting love story. That's for another day. But I did have a degree when I met John, but then I wanted to be a teacher. So I pursue my studies here in the United States in, my degree in Spanish, then my master's degree in education, and then my doctorate. One of the things that I have to say, was the struggle of English as a second language going to school, because I have this, my English was all just tourism English. So, as you know, raising the children at home, English, we had to speak English. I had to work in my English to go to school. So it was a little bit of a struggle to keep the roots, the Latina roots, and then at the same time, trying to go to school and, get better with my English. So it was and I accommodate myself there. But my family is all in Chile, Santiago de Chile. I'm the only one here. My parents visit at least twice a year. And one of the things that I work very hard here at CalU is to create this community of, our students, get them together as Hispanics, as, Latinos, and help each other. So that's kind of my objectives. We have a lot of girls, a lot of female students who are Latinas, and that also make a very interesting situation, because as somebody who understands the struggles of being a woman and be out there in the workforce, academics, home, dealing with home, school, and so forth, I try to help them and push them to pursue and finish school and see the future from the women perspective and Latina perspective. So that's kind of one of the things that I work very hard here at CalU. And so I just thank you for the panel here, the invitation. And if you have any questions, let me know.
I guess that leaves me. Hi, I'm Sheila Lorenzo de la Peña, and I was born in Cuba, and I was there for quite a bit of my youth until my parents immigrated with my sister and I to South Florida, and that was home pretty much most of the rest of my upbringing until recently when I came to Edinburgh. It has been quite interesting to go through the pandemic in rural PA. Lately, what's been coming to mind when it comes to maintaining the culture in this area of the state is just going above and beyond whenever I can. I have two small daughters, and we're kind of like drilling like Spanish. When every time they throw out English, I'm like, oh, Spanish. What are you watching? I don't hear Spanish. Like, let's switch the TV also. And if there's no Spanish, then you can't watch that show. Let's move it to the other one. Whenever somebody visits from South Florida, like my mom will I'll ask her for a couple things from Sedano's, and she like always sends like a giant box of all the veggies. So lately I've been in the kitchen making ajiaco with like everything I could find. So ajiaco has like all the meats, anything that walks is in there, and all the vegetables, all the roots. I offered my neighbor some, and he couldn't figure out like what I was saying because he's got some allergies. And so it was interesting because I gave him what is it, malanga fritters, and he came back with 2 days later. It's like, I think that's taro root. I'm like, wait, maybe like we don't call it that. Like I it's malanga. If we do that malanga, like, okay, sure. So it's just interesting to like introduce other people to some of our culture through the food, because I mean, that's all I ever do. Like if I have food, I'm going to share it with whoever's around me and see what they think.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing a bit about your own heritage and your intersectionalities. As you can see, everyone in our panel has varying stories for their Latino, Latina, Latinx heritage. And through perspective sharing and listening to other stories, we can gain empathy and understanding for the complexity of vast cultures, and that can help to humanize the diversity in our world, and also help us see the size of the world, right? We're just in one little corner of it, but the world is very vast. So I'd like to transition the conversation to our next point of discussion, which centers around the words Hispanic and Latino. So the words Hispanic and Latino are often used interchangeably in the US to collectively refer to people who have origin in Spanish-speaking countries. And although these terms are used as synonyms, often when asking for demographic information, like on US Census forms or in filling out any kind of paperwork you might have filled out before, right, for an employer, for school, for medical, there is a history and some contention around the words Hispanic and Latino. And this also extends to the use of the words Latina, which is a gendered term referring to someone who identifies as female with Latin American ancestry. And then there are the gender neutral terms of Latinx or Latin. So I'd like to open a point of discussion for anyone to share any thoughts or experiences the panelists might have with the terms Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latinx, and Latin. Just what are your thoughts on these terms and their use?
Stephanie,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna kind of start off in the sense that, you know, being born and raised in Ohio from Mexican ancestor and migrant workers and stuff like that. And so I kind of challenged my colleagues, my friends on Facebook and LinkedIn that I said, who am I? You know, and I said, if you want to find out, join this session, because what I tell people is I can be Mexican, I can be Mexican American, I can be Latino, I can be Chicano, I can be Hispanic, or I can just be American. And so who am I? Well, I decide that. I give myself, you know, that title. And so if I'm in a civil rights kind of mood, I will be Chicano for that day. In fact, I remember my mom, when I was like 6 years old, asking me, who are you? And I said, well, I'm Dave. No. Who are you? And I was like, Dave, hello. She goes, no, you're Chicano, and don't ever forget that. And so for me, it's about who I feel, who I want to be for that day, and not have anybody else tell me who I should be. Because being born and raised in Ohio, and Spanish is not my native language. There in Ohio, we got in trouble for speaking Spanish from our school teachers, from our friends didn't encourage us to speak Spanish. So I had to kind of learn it through college. But, you know, for me, titles for my mom's generation are Latino and Chicano or Mexican American. But future generations, they kind of gone away from that to Hispanic. What I've seen, Hispanic, you know, being that next phase. And then now with this generation of Latinx, Latinx, which I myself, I don't use for myself, and that's my choice. But I do respect others that want that title and want that title used. I'm all for that. But for me, you know, it kind of, I can, you know, for me, it's being Latino, Mexican American, or Chicano. That's kind of how I identify myself. And so to answer your question, who am I? I am who I say I want to be, and I'm proud to be that.
Thank you, Dave. If I could add something, would I have the opportunity to share screen? Because it'd be easier to say what I gotta say if I can share. Do I have that right? It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
I can give you that. Just
I
I
appreciate
believe I might be able to.
It should be an option within the share screen somewhere, but allowing others. Not sure exactly where.
Oh, I'm going to have to ask Chris for assistance with that, please.
Well, while they figure that out, I can get started. Because what I want to do is first, Latino or Hispanic, at least in the Spanish world, is well defined. There's no question what it means and who covers it. And I want to share that background first, and then how in the United States, I guess I didn't adopt the same form, and then go from there. If somebody can let me know when I can share the screen, then I can do that. So the short answer people used to give to make it easy when people try to ask about the differences, based on the Spanish definition that, well, all Hispanics are Latinos, but not all Latinos are Hispanic. And that has to do with the origins of the term.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still not able to share the screen, but that's okay. All right, so what I was going to share with you, if I get the chance, I still share it, but I'll tell you verbally. Because if you go to Real Academia Española de la Lengua, for those who are not familiar, that's where all the Spanish countries get together and decide on the dictionary terms and definitions, and it gets revised periodically. Well, when you look at the definition, Hispano, it gives you a couple of them, but it says natural de España, somebody natural from Hispania. Now, Hispania was the name that the Romans gave to the Iberian Peninsula way back when. So technically speaking, if you are a descendant of that area, that region, Hispania, which is now known as Spain, then you fall under the Hispanic. Now, you may have heard that we also say Hispanoamerica. And the reason to be specific is because then that's when we're talking about the Hispanics in the New World, to put it that way, in the American continents. And it's because if you go strictly with that definition, well, as of right now, last time I checked, people from Philippines can be also classified as Hispanic because of their, it's not typical that we do that, but Spain recognizes them as falling under Hispanic. Now, moving on. So that's more like a historical regional thing if you're descended from that area or have some kind of ties, connections in that sense. Then moving on to the Latino thing, that's more of a language issue. That if your main language is one of those direct derivations of Latin, like Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and people are like, oh, but Latino, well, that's where we have Latino America, when you want to be specific to Latinos in this side of the world. But speaking Italian is also Latino. Sometimes what I use to let people know, well, think of the old movies when they say Latin lover, you can picture an Italian in that role. And so it applies the term Latino according to the definitions outside. Now, that said, by the way, there's some gray areas here. There's arguments about Romania and France, and how much Hispanic and Latino can be considered. I'm not an expert on that area, but those are the gray areas that some people debate. I'll leave that for later. So that's as we define it in the Spanish world, according to last time I checked. But when the United States decided to use the terms, they didn't follow specifically that, and they had their own definition. Now, this is where you may hear some people claim linguistic imperialism, I believe is the term, whereas like, we don't care what you use, that we're going to say this and this how it's going to be done. And we're going to invade your language in that sense. And that creates then some kind of a concern. But ultimately, what I'm trying to get to is that there seems to be this large confusion in the United States that I don't find it necessary when it's already been properly defined for a very long time, and it's not that hard to track. And that's, I guess, my piece on the Hispanic and Latino Latina. Now jumping in Latinx. There's people that accept it, and there's people that don't want to accept it. The people that don't want to accept it fall in two groups, or I'm sure more than two groups, but the two groups I want to talk about is the ones that are just being against the gender neutrality. I'm going to put those on one side. And then you have another group that feel that it just doesn't fit the Spanish grammar. So English is a more neutral language, or it lends itself from neutrality in Spanish well. It's more difficult. And I've had this discussion with people that don't speak Spanish. No, how can it be? Just put an X on. I said, no, it doesn't. It's just not that simple. When it comes to the grammar part, so I want to say up front, I'm not against Latinx. That's fine. I want to use it. It works in the English language. And the ones I want to reject it based on not believing in the neutrality, I'm not going to address those right now. That'll be a different discussion. But I would like to elaborate on the grammatical argument, just so we all better understand that is not that they're being evil about it. What they're saying is like, yes, we can do this, but we need to find a better way because this one doesn't fit. The example that I always use is a sentence like, they are sitting at the table. Now let's just go with they plural, and I'm going to get to the whole singular plural argument for now, just for simplicity. They are sitting at the table. That sentence is perfectly neutral in English. However, that sentence cannot be literally translated in Spanish. The first thing you have to choose is a gender. 4 out of 6 words in that sentence have a gender. So you have to choose from ellos están sentados en la mesa, ellas están sentadas en la mesa. So 4 out of 6 words have gender there. So if we just follow that rule, grammatically speaking, just drop the last letter, put an X, that will sound really weird. Ellas están sentadas en las mesas. It destroys the entire sentence. So the argument is that for those in English, this kind of like will sound in English. They are sitting at dex, table X. And that's what that argument is like, look, we're not against it. We're just saying we need to find a different way to do it in Spanish. It doesn't work just as simple as dropping a letter and putting an X. In English, I think it works well. Go ahead, I'm done.
I'm just trying to give you the conference 2 minutes, 1 minute, so everyone can share, but that was
Right.
good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for providing that historical context on the words and some of the more contended areas when it comes to appropriate use of language with the terms and the gender pronouns that they insinuate, and also the Spanish language in general, right? Which of course we didn't have an opportunity to get to Latin, but that was kind of the solution, right? Was since Latinx doesn't fit grammatically, Latin is the new version that really started circulating in 2017 in Latin American countries and is kind of fixing that problem, or attempting to somehow, right? Because language shifts just like everything in the world shifts, right? As the world evolves, so does culture, so does language. So thank you so much for that very enlightening and thorough background, Jason. Anyone else like to share any thoughts?
I would like to share, first of all, yes, it's a new concept, so new that I had to, like, the first time I heard it, which was like this year or last year, I had to research to see what it meant. It's interesting because we professors, when we are trying to, substitute for a course, we do level 3 or level 400 XX. Have you remember, what I'm talking about? So it's a way of saying we really don't know what is going, like, it's something like that. So yes, it's not so specific, but then it opens room for a lot of things, force 343, 363, 370. So of course it opens the room to anything Latin, women, men, plural, singular, maybe it works. But I didn't know if I was a Latinx. I said, what is a Latinx? So it's interesting. Of course, in my case, I grew up in Costa Rica, so I don't have to be defining myself as a Latino, as a Hispanic. I'm just a Costa Rican living in Costa Rica, and that's it. When you go to other places, like United States, and now you have to fill out forms, we had a whole conversation in my family. It's like, what do we put? We put white and Hispanic because they don't give too many choices. They give the Asian, the Caucasian, or the white, and then the white / Hispanic. So we concluded that maybe we're white and Hispanic. I understand the definition, as Jason said, the Hispanic definition is already there. So we qualify as Hispanic, we qualify as Latinos, and it looks like we're also white. But of course, that could be questionable because, are we from indigenous origin? Are we somewhat mixed? And then we have other kinds of categories that are not listed. And of course, they give the option of other in these forms. So it's interesting because it makes you think of who you are more so when you've left, of course, the country that didn't make any distinction because we were all Costa Rican. So in my case, it was more of a, okay, let me stop and think who I could be in this form. I always thought, of course, anyone from Latin America is a Latino. I mean, to me, that was not too complicated, right? And then, of course, if I'm a female, then of course I'm a Latina because of the Spanish language that puts an A in anything female, kind of, generally speaking. So, yeah. As long as and I don't know if this is the moment to talk about this, we don't equate Latino to only Mexican, because we are not all Mexico through the South. We have people from Chile, we have people from Cuba, we have people from Costa Rica, and so on and so forth. And yes, there is a little bit of ignorance, as we are all ignorant in things, because we cannot know everything. But I think that we become ambassadors of education in the aspect of, no, we can look Latino and not be Mexican, with all respect to Dave, because that's your background, and I think that's great, but it doesn't stop there. And the generalization can really hurt feelings, especially in teenagers, because I had daughters growing up in high school where people would insist they were Mexicans, and they were not. Anything against Mexico? Of course not. But anything against the what is not the truth? The truth is, you are Chilean, I'm Costa Rican, you're from Puerto Rico, and I think we need to do a better job, all of us. I think this is why we're talking about these things right here, in asking, as I tell my students, an open-ended question. Don't ask yes, no questions, like, are you Mexican? That's already assuming a little bit. Where are you from? That's an open-ended question. It's okay not to know everything. I don't know so many things, but if it is about a person, it's better to ask an open-ended question. What brought you to United States? Don't assume I crossed the border. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. So if you say, did you cross the border? Did you, yes or no? Yes, no question. It's already assuming. You know, it's like I've had questions like when people say, okay, so what brought you to Clarion? Especially in Walmart, sometimes the cashiers, and then I said, oh, the university, I teach at Clarion University. And then, yes, no question. Do you teach Spanish? Because of course you look a little Latina, then maybe you speak Spanish, or I overheard you were speaking Spanish to your family. And yes, I mean, I appreciate people's desire to know about me, but just because I speak Spanish doesn't mean I'm a professor of Spanish. I would love to be. I don't think all the training to be a professor of Spanish like Andrea is, right? That's what you teach, Andrea. I think Andrea can still teach me a lot of things. I'm not going to say, oh yeah, I could, maybe I could teach Spanish, but not at the level of college. I don't think so. I learned economics in Spanish. I could teach some Spanish, but just the assuming things, we need to be careful. Open-ended questions again, like, oh, what do you teach? That's an open-ended question. Very important I invite all of us, Latinos, Latinx, to share this with our students, to take a second and share this, because if we teach 100, 200 students a semester or a year, those are ambassadors of remembering. You know, I remember Professor Heveling or Trejo saying this and that, because at least in Clarion is not too diverse. Dave was saying that, you know, that he misses the diversity in certain areas of Ohio. Like at Clarion, I'm the only Latina faculty. Like there are Latinos, Jason is one of them, but I feel like I'm responsible. Instead of like getting frustrated, sometimes we do, or disappointed or giving up, maybe we just said, we're here for a reason, and let's see if we can just inform and educate at least our students who are there in our path for a reason. I'll stop there because otherwise I can go on forever.
I do have to, I'm going to follow up Sandra's thoughts here. There are two things: the use of the Latinx in the Latino, Latina. It is for me, it's a heavy transition. Naturally, Latino, Latina, and that's what is in my head. That's the way I grew up. But when I'm, you know, in the more academic setting, you know, I use the Latinx term that in a more informal setting. So I think it's a matter of adapting to, you know, we have, you know, I'm older, so, you know, you have the new generations, they identify that way. Personally, I feel let us just move with what is out there and keep, you know, showing what you have based on your background and your age in this case. So I do adapt a lot to all these changes, and I have no problem with that. The other thing is yeah, we talk about identify, you know, who we are. I'm from Chile. My Spanish is, you know, different dialect. We eat differently and so forth. But the majority of my students are from Mexico. They're Mexican Americans. And when I do, you know, when I with them in a classroom on an event, their heritage comes to play heavily. And I think it's a matter of balancing things, but at the same time, I feel, you know, I have no problem with, you know, do the Day of the Death theme when it's something that as a Chilean we don't have at all. But I adapted, I embrace it. And you see my mother today said, what are you doing? Because it's not something that they relate to as well. So I think it's adapting to the group where you are as well is important, and it's a matter of acceptance. I have no problem, people will come naturally say, well, which part of Mexico you come from? I say, well, no, I'm just come from, and I'm okay with it because that's what they are exposed to all the time. And as Sandra said, and then the conversation comes along and you say, no, I'm from this part of the world. And but I think it's a natural assumption, and I'm okay with it. And I just then explain who I am. And
Yeah, I think, yeah, and to kind of top on and go on that point is beyond the terms, we're all different from a cultural perspective. And when I went to Lorain, Ohio, mainly Puerto Rican who lived there, I went to a restaurant, I ordered a buen menudo and fajita, and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, what do you mean don't know what I'm talking about? It's menudo. Goes, menudo for me is my pocket change. I'm like, what is going on here? But again, my lens was Mexican American. And I thought we all spoke the same Spanish. We all listened to the same music. We all eat the same foods. And you know what? It was a learning moment for me. A Latino, Mexican American, Chicano. Learn about Puerto Rican culture. Much different. That's the assumption that people assume you're Mexican American. Number one. Number two, they feel we all eat the same foods, listen to all the same music, the same culture and things like that. And so beyond the terms that we're talking about today, the cultural aspect, we're much different from each one, the foods and everything else. So that's where I try to educate others. And I kind of learn from myself about your cultures, because your culture is different from that of mine.
Yeah. Thank you, Dave. Andrea, did you have anything else that you would like to add before we move on to the next panelist?
No, I'm good. Thank you. Somebody else turn will be okay. Thank you.
Well, somebody else decides. I just couldn't continue on my flag somewhere. Is a thing we do. We got to have the flag presence on everybody else.
Yes. I also appreciate how Dave was sharing about differences in language, which Andrea was alluding to as well, right? When it comes to not just our cultures, but our language. Many people, some of the stereotypes, preconceived notions, and assumptions when it comes to someone who identifies as Latino, Latina, Latinx, or Hispanic is that we speak the same language. And although we may speak Spanish, we do not all speak the same language, right? There's words that I could be using in Spanish from Argentina that mean something completely different in Puerto Rico or in Mexico or in El Salvador, right? And any other country, in Cuba. And that's also part of understanding a bit more about the culture. And as far as the terms, people in Spanish-speaking countries, they often prefer to identify by the country, city, or region of origin where their heritage is from, right? So when referring to themselves, they would say, I'm, Mexican, I'm Argentine, I am from El Salvador, or El Salvadorian, or, I'm from the North, I'm from the South. So in English, that would sound like saying, someone saying that they are a New Yorker when referring to themselves as being from New York City, or someone from the US identifying as from the South, implying that they're from southeastern regions of the US. So there is some commonality that we find there as well when it comes to cultural understanding and how there are varying layers and intersectionalities to identities, for us as Latinos, as Latinx as well. And, just to share a brief story, an experience that I had. So growing up in Miami is a melting pot of cultures. And when I was around various cultures, there were several points in my life when also I questioned, what box do I check on a form when it asks, what is your race and ethnicity? So identifying as Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latinx, these are ethnicities and not necessarily race, right? Race is something completely different. And often that's also a misconception, is that race and ethnicity are the same, when in fact they're not. And if we make them the same, we're inviting, room to erase other parts of cultural heritage, like indigenous roots. And when I was filling out a form at one point in school, I think it was probably around middle school, and the box had to check off if you were Hispanic at the time. They weren't using the term Latino yet in many forms like they do nowadays. And the person sitting next to me, who also identified as a Latino and was from El Salvador, said to me, why are you checking that box? And I said, well, I'm checking this box because I think this is how I identified, and have the guidance of my parents there. But, we spoke Spanish. We had friends from all different Latin American countries and Spain. And he says to me, but you're not Hispanic. And I was very confused and said, well, why didn't you think I'm Hispanic? He said, well, because you're white. And there I had my first, identity complication where just staring at a form and checking off a box all of a sudden made me think about, who am I? How do others see me? And how does it feel or impact my life when others view me a certain way that I don't view myself? So, with that being said, we're running short on time. We're just a few more minutes, but are there any other preconceived notion, biases, or maybe even discrimination that, we've felt from others, ways to kind of dispel these stereotypes that anyone would like to share about?
In my experience, and I don't want to use the word discrimination or anything like that, but my experience of most of these confusions have been just, I want to use the word ignorance, but it's just not knowing. Ignorance is kind of too strong. I don't want to go that way. It sounds negative. It's just not knowing. There's lack of information out there. Well, these are the things that help, right? What we're doing here, and little by little the word gets out. And that's what it is. And I can see why a lot of people, well, depending where you're from, a lot of people may automatically Mexican. No, Mexican has the largest population. Like that, unless you're in New York, we have that under control over there. We got New York and Dominicans and Puerto Ricans. New Yorican, by the way, I mean that term, we have that one too. Yeah. But I think it's just about communication, and a lot of people just don't know. I use we got Rogers is our guy that does a lot of this cultural stuff. He goes in the classrooms and talk about to the students.
He's here.
He's here. Rogers, you here? Where? Oh yeah, there he is. Yeah, he's great. So and our population in Clarion, our the demographic is specific one, and a lot of them just didn't know, and they always walk away with like, wow, I didn't know. I just didn't know, and they're excited to at least know now, and it's just exposure. One quick thing on the word menudo, by the way, it also means a boy band group that we have was very popular. If you heard of Ricky Martin, that he was one of those, he was from there. So that's another menudo use. Just had to throw that in there.
That is the Latino Backstreet Boys. Yeah, menudo.
I think that as I was saying before, not assuming, which is kind of the idea of stereotype, right? Like I being with a friend in Pittsburgh, entering a hospital, I'm talking to a friend. We're gonna visit another friend's daughter who's in the hospital. She's from Dominican Republic. I'm from Costa Rica. Are we gonna speak English? No, we're gonna speak Spanish, and we're speaking Spanish, and then the security person starts like doing body language, assuming that I don't speak English. Kind of like, okay, do this, like, but he's not talking to me. Like, really? So I was saying, no, that's interesting. And then I realized, I think he thinks I don't speak English. And then I had to inform him, educate him. And instead of me playing the game, I could have been easy. I said, sure, let's just open the arms and he can check me and let's be done with this. No, this is my opportunity to make a difference. Then the next person, the next Latino is going to come speaking Spanish. is going to know better. So I had to explain, I speak English. I actually make a living of speaking and explaining things in English. Just because I speak Spanish doesn't mean I don't speak English. It's a little limiting that way. I think we become ambassadors. Thank you for this event. This is so necessary in some areas more than others because people don't know, as Jason said. But I feel obliged to educate, to pass it, to speak up, to say it, because people, yes, sometimes even if you have an accent, that doesn't mean you that affects your intellectual capabilities, by the way. Having an accent means you didn't learn the language when you were a child, but doesn't make me any less intelligent, any less valuable. And that's why we need to be always, like in our case, leaning in, just kind of like be strong, confident ambassadors, which is not necessarily easy when you're a teenager. I said, I have 4 daughters. Now the youngest is 18, but they went through phases when people assume, when people say things, there are phases where they didn't feel necessarily the need to speak Spanish. Like, good job, Sheila, at teaching them that, because yes, they are fully bilingual. Now they feel like they are not totally bilingual because they don't speak Spanish the same way they speak English because they did school in English. We didn't have the possibility of a bilingual school here in Clarion, but to me, they are bilingual. They can have a conversation. They talk to Jason in Spanish at times and so on. It's possible, but we need to be strong, believe in our culture, humbly educate, and break stereotypes. We are the ambassadors of breaking stereotypes with what we study, with what we say, how we behave, etc. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Education is the great equalizer. I believe that as well. Yep. Any other thoughts? Well, actually, we're right on the hour according to my watch. So thank you so much, everyone, our wonderful panelists, for joining us today, for sharing, for being brave. All of those of you who attended, I hope that this information was helpful to you and that you learned something new about Latinx cultural heritage. And we have a number of events at all 3 of our campuses throughout the next couple of 2 weeks to celebrate the month. So please feel free to join in on any of those. And thank you again. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bring your flags next time.
Gracias.
Yeah.
Disfruten su café con leche.
Sí.
Ahora, que tengan buenas tardes.
Okay. Ahora tengo ganas de comer mofongo y mangú, porque mi marido, mi marido es de República Dominicana, so,
Okay, mangú, sí, él sí sabe, él sí sabe.
I'll be heading to Taco Bell here shortly. So. Just kidding.
Saludos, abrazos.
Saludos.
Chao, chao.
Nos vemos, gente, que tengan buenas tardes. Muchas gracias, bye.
Buenas tardes.